Hello! So, I've been asked a few times to show a tutorial on how to create a little shader effect like this. Basically, we have some depth intersection going, and we have some Fresnel going on this. Before we start, I just wanted to put a little disclaimer that I am not a tech artist. Everything that I do, I just kind of find enough for me to be able to communicate the idea that I need to communicate, but in terms of is this the right way to go about doing something like this? Is this optimized? I have no idea. But for those who are curious how you can get an effect in Unity like this, feel free to follow the tutorial. Basically, I will show what this small little shader can do. I kept it really simple for the sake of the tutorial, so we can control the Fresnel, how apparent it is and how far from the edges it can go, and also a bit of an offset on the depth intersection. And as you can see, it works with all the geo. Yeah, that's about it. For those who are just want to skip ahead and just see how the graph looks like, basically this is what it looks like. The idea is that we grab the position and the position of the object and the camera position. We're going to do some vector math to find the depth of the object. We're going to offset that depth so we know how much of a depth effect we want, in a way. So basically we're going to grab its depth, its offset depth, and then smooth step it against the scene depth. And then we're going to do the Fresnel effect on the object, combine the two together and apply it as a alpha map. So now that we've seen the solution, let's go through the small little tutorial. So the first thing you will want is to make sure that in the package manager you have the lightweight rendering pipeline installed and up to date. I'm using 4.80 running Unity 2.18.3.0F2, and I've set up a small little scene out here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sphere. It's going to be a test object, and just since we're going to be doing certain intersection logic and transparent objects, I'm going to turn off the shadows on this object. No shadows on the sphere. Cool. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a shader. There's a few presets in here that I was working on, but I'm just going to create something from scratch. So let's go create. Let's create a shader and let's make an unlit graph and call it our tutorial graph. And I'm going to make a new material. And I'm going to call it tutorial material. I will select my tutorial graph as the shader and drag it in. So we have a nice gray, nothing in here shader. Another thing that we want to make sure that's turned on for the sake of this tutorial is if you go into the main camera, you should be using the pipeline settings, but basically you want to be rendering the texture. So in my pipeline settings, so my lightweight asset, once you download it and once you install the package, you want to make sure that we are rendering the depth texture. So then now that it's done, I'm going to go into my tutorial graph and start working on the shader. So the very first thing we need to know is, since the logic of the depth intersection shader is we're going to be grabbing the depth of our object and comparing it against the depth of the scene. First, let's grab the depth of the scene. So I'm just going to search for depth, and there's scene depth. that right in just to see what that looks like. Save the asset, and you will see something like this. Now, the reason why we're seeing this, if you can tell that the edges are somewhat white, is because our shader is opaque. So it's drawing the depth of the sphere, depending on how far it is. Now, in your scene, by moving the object, you might not see it change in color so gradually. That's probably because if you go to your camera, you will see that your far clipping plane is probably set to something like 1000 by default. So moving the object is not gonna showcase the depth so much. But if I move it closer, something that I can actually see the difference in, so let's say I'm set it to 10 meters, moving it 10 meters away is going to make it perfectly white, so this is as far as the camera can actually see. And moving it closer is going to make it dark up until it clips with the camera. Cool. So I'm going to go back to my shader, and I'm going to change the unlit master. So I'm going to click on the gear, and I'm going to switch the surface from opaque to transparent. I'll set it to alpha, and I'll also set it to two-sided. And save. So now what you will notice is that it doesn't matter how far I push, it will remain kind of similar. And what you're seeing is you're actually seeing the depth of the scene that's being drawn inside of the sphere, which is super useful because basically we want to grab that depth and then compare it against what's the depth of our object. And the way we're going to do that, back in my tutorial graph, and I'm going to do some vector math. So I'm going to grab the camera, and I'm going to grab object world position. And the idea is I want to grab the vector that points me from my from my camera towards the position. So the way I would do that is that if my object position, let's say B, and my camera position is A, I'm going to subtract my object position from my camera position, B minus A, to get the direction and the magnitude towards my vector. That in, instead of my scene depth, we can keep that for later. Save the asset, and you'll see something like this, which is in no way helpful to us. Because this is just a vector for now. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab dot product, and we're going to project this vector that we got that points from our camera to the from the camera to the object, and we're going to project it against the direction of our camera. So on dot product, this is going to give us the magnitude of the vector that is projected onto the direction. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to remap that. Since if I'm going to pipe that in, just happening, it will kind of work, but kind of won't. You're going to see it turn pure white. I'm an idiot. Okay. Camera dot direction object, take that in, save. And you'll notice that it's just pure white, unless I get somewhat close, and then it actually drops in opacity. Go into it in a second why that is. So let's go back to the tutorial graph. My settings reset. Oh, no, they did not. That's good. So the reason why this is happening is because whenever the distance is, basically we're grabbing the distance to the object, and we're saying that the distance is going to dictate the color. So we're capping out at 1 meter. So that's not overly helpful to us because our camera can see, or far clip position can be something as big as 1,000. So what we want to do is we want to remap, type that in, and we want to remap it based on how far can the camera see into the color, from 0 to however far it is. And thankfully the camera node is actually giving us that information. So I'm going to combine or far plane. I'm going to pipe it into our XY, so this becomes our Y, or the G main channel, and I just need the vector to pipe it into our min. So what that has done is it's saying grab the distance between me and my object, and then remap it between 0 and however far my camera can see, and turn it into 0 being 0, and then the furthest point being 1. Kind of what we want. Cool. So we save the asset. That does. Cool. So you'll notice that it's kind of similar to what we've seen in the very beginning when our object was opaque. You'll see some weird crap happening on this. Let's fix that weird crap. You can see some artifact happening. I'll put my tutorial graph, and one thing I'm going to do is, instead of messing with the color, the alpha, we're going to make it less transparent, and we'll keep the color. Actually, let's make the color white for now. I'm going to save that. See what that looks like. I can see my object. Fantastic. There it is. So the closer it is, the more transparent it is. The further it is, the more opaque it is. Which is, if you can tell, I can see it in my my scene camera, but I can't see my debug. And the reason for that is because the far planes are different on these cameras. So in order for me to see it, I probably would have to zoom in so far that it's probably actually too small for me to see. But if I was to grab my camera and just increase its far position back to, let's say, what it usually is, 1,000, I also can't see it in here. Too close. Well, that's actually that usable. So now that we have this information, now that we know how to get the to grab the depth color, to get the position of our object and convert it into color from 0 to 1, let's turn that into something useful. So I'm just going to tidy this up really quick. I hate all of this, looks super ugly. Not useful for me anyways. Tidy this up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it through step just to see what happens. So basically I'm going to compare our object depth information against the scene information. Back in. Yes, I do. Safe. So you can't really see much of a difference, but I can promise you there is something going on here that we'll be able to see if I was to go back into my shader graph and invert it. So I'm getting information in here from that ranges from 0 to 1, and I'm getting a 1. So I actually want to reverse that. I want to do a 1 minus. So I want to subtract from 1. And back in. The asset. Back. And you'll notice there's something interesting. You'll notice that there's, I don't know if it's actually possible to see on the video, but there's a very, very fine 1 pixel line of intersection. Super, super thin. But you kind of see that we're starting to work with something. So the next thing I'm going to do is I have my my depth information right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to offset it. I'm going to get another piece of output that's going to take my information and offset it. Let's say if my object was a meter further away than it actually is. And the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to take what I get here out of the dot product, and I'm going to add to it. So I'm going to add 1. Actually, let's make a slider. Slider that goes from 0 to 1. I'll make it a 1 for now. I'm going to make a copy of this since we don't want to mess with what we have. I just want to make a duplicate. Type that in. I use the same settings here. And instead of a step, I'm going to use a smooth step. And what will that let us do? Clean up your graph, your liking. I'm going to put H1, H2, and then my scene into the input. Invert it. And save the assets, see what happened. Boom. Basically, we're saying the intersection is happening at wherever the whatever my object depth is intersecting with my scene depth. But also it's gonna gradient towards an offset of the object's depth, and it might be hard for to kind of make sense out of this. And I'm definitely not the best person to explain, since not exactly sure how we'll be able to explain this. But that's the result. And what you can do is you can expose this. So we can take our slider and we can expose it as a property. Now let's call that depth offset. And I'll leave it at 1, but I don't want a slider. Let's actually default this so we can make it go past our limit. And now that that's a thing, we can take our material and I'm going to adjust the depth. And you'll see, like, once I go into the negative, you'll see some weird results. But as long as I'm sticking to the positive, I have the ability to tune this depth. Kind of cool. I can also move it here. You see that it works with all the other objects. It will intersect. Now, something I found that for spherical objects that would definitely help in terms of being able to see the rest of the edges, since it is a sphere after all, is adding a little bit of a Fresnel effect. So I'm going to go back, and this is all of my logic for the depth intersection. And now I'm going to use some of the stuff that we have in here to get a Fresnel look. So remember when we grabbed the direction that points from camera towards the object? So what we want to do is we want to do the same thing again, except we want to use that information and we want to normalize it. So we don't get a magnitude more than 1. And then what we want to do, we want to get this is giving us a vector, and then we want a dot product between this and or normal vector in world position. Yes, that should work. So when I pipe it back in here, I'm just going to replace this for now. Save the asset. See what that looks like. Cool. We got kind of like an inverse of the Fresnel, but something that's kind of weird is that if you notice, we're only seeing the back face. And the reason why we're seeing that is because the dot product between faces that are facing us and where the camera is in relationship to the object is actually a negative. So we want to fix that. So I'm going to grab this dot product, and then I'm going to grab an absolute value out of this. And as a last piece, I want to do a 1 minus. That we got a cool Fresnel that works both on back faces and front faces. No intersections, since we've disabled the intersection. But we also want to be able to kind of control the how far the Fresnel goes and cuts into the normals that are pointing towards the camera or away from the camera. So I'll go back into my tutorial graph, and I'm gonna repeat the trick that I've done with a smooth step. That's gonna be our input. And then we want another, make another slider. See what happens here. So as I'm increasing it towards 1, it actually becomes less significant. It's probably the opposite of what we want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run it through a 1 minus. So now increasing the slider is actually going to give us a more of a Fresnel look. And as I'm cutting back, it's going to be pushed more towards the normals that are perpendicular to the camera's direction. So I'm going to turn this into a property. Call that Fresnel. And the last thing that I want to do is I want to combine the two effects. The way I'm going to do it is super simple. I'm just going to grab whichever value is maximum is the one that I'm going to use. So I'm going to grab what I get out of my depth intersection. I'm going to grab what I get out of my Fresnel, and then I'm going to just maximum between the two of them. Type it back in, save, look at what my graph looks like, and boom, there it is. We have both the Fresnel and the depth, and I have independent control between the two of them. Kind of match them if I want to. So that's about it. You can keep going with this graph. You can add some cool effects. You can get some cool, you know, if you're making something like a shield, you can tossing a texture in there and warp it around using the UVs or whatever tricks you want to use. But in terms of the depth intersection, using all the nodes that are inside of the shader graph, that's how I kind of went about doing that. So hopefully this was helpful for watching, and have a good one.